No, no, no. 'Cause even if the end wins this war, I will fight for you. And I love where you go, where you go.
Hello everybody, welcome to class today. We'll go ahead and get started. I don't expect to keep you too long today, and you could probably see why when you have a look at our Chapter 4 objectives today. Part of our objectives are to learn about loading Oracle VirtualBox as a virtual environment and all that kind of stuff. And you've already done that in the previous module. So we're just going to kind of gloss right through all of that. These live class sessions are kind of separate from the labs and stuff of that nature, so we get a little bit of overlap. But I'm not going to waste your time with redoing anything that you've already done. As we get started today, I wanted to briefly say that I am going to be writing your midterm this week. Next week is your midterm week, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. The midterm will be a series of short answer questions. So you'll be looking at roughly 6 to 8 short answer questions that'll be pulled from our live class sessions. So you might want to go back and rewatch our previous live class sessions, take a few notes, that sort of thing, before the midterm exam next week. So that's just a bit of information as we get started here today. So for this week's live session, we're going to have a look at P2V, or physical to virtual conversions. We're going to go really quickly through VMware Player and Oracle VirtualBox and creating a new virtual machine. So this live class will probably be a little shorter than some previous ones. But let's get started, shall we? So let's talk about the P2V process for a minute, and let's just have a look back. And so we're going to look at this kind of in relation to servers and using existing physical servers as the templates for making virtual machines. And we can kind of think about this in relation to data centers and servers and things of that nature that are starting up these days. So essentially what we're looking at is that even though, there's an increasing number of virtual machines that are being deployed, there are still millions of physical servers running applications and application workloads worldwide in data centers. And even with all the advancements in virtualization and everything, all the work that's being done, new workloads are still being deployed as physical servers. So, as data center administrators are getting more into virtualization, essentially what we're doing is we're looking at two strategies for using virtualization in these environments. And those two strategies are consolidation and containment, which we have here. So when we think about consolidation is the practice of taking existing physical servers and converting them into virtual servers that can run atop the hypervisor. So, in the past, we've seen that there's, still a bunch of physical servers that are running business applications and various applications. So in order to get savings and make things more efficient, we take virtualization and we apply it to these physical servers that are running these applications to migrate a significant portion of the physical server workloads to virtual infrastructure. So what we're doing is we're taking and we're removing physical servers from a data center, by virtualizing them onto a fewer number of hosts. So to affect this change, essentially what we need to do is we need tools and methodologies to convert existing servers into the virtual machines. So that's where we end up with the hypervisors and all the other bits of infrastructure that we'll talk about. We also have containment, and we define containment thusly as deploying new applications directly into a virtual environment. So we can see the difference between the two, just take an aside here and talk about consolidation in terms of what we do with the environments, taking the environments and making fewer physical environments and more virtual environments. And then with containment, we're talking about the applications that are on these environments and how we deploy new applications. So containment is the practice of initially deploying new applications as virtual machines. So we're not adding any new physical infrastructure to the environment. The only reason that we would need to add physical infrastructure to the environment when we're considering containment is when we have to expand the amount of virtual infrastructure that we can support. So when we're talking about the P2V process and containment, we're talking about taking new applications, anything that's new, and putting it directly onto a virtual environment. When we're talking about consolidation, we're talking about taking existing physical environments and migrating them into virtual environments. Let's talk briefly about hot and cold cloning. So when we're doing the P2V process, there's essentially two ways that we can do this process, and that's hot and cold. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Right, so with hot cloning, what we're doing is we're creating a virtual machine while the source workload is active. So we're creating a virtual machine while the host is still running. And this gives us the ability to keep the application running so there's no interruption in service. One disadvantage to this is that the data is constantly changing on the source machine when you're doing a hot clone, because it's running. It's running, and as it's running, it's updating and things are changing, going back and forth. And it's difficult to ensure that all of those changes are going to be migrated to the newly created hot cloned VM. So that can be a problem if you're in a business critical or mission critical environment. While this machine is up and running, you're making this hot clone. If you don't get all the data transferred over to the new virtual environment as you're consolidating, then you've lost data that may never be retrievable. You might never be able to get that data again. Cold cloning requires the application to be inactive. So when we're talking cold cloning, the source machine is non-operational. It's been shut down. So that ensures that a straight copy is done from old to new. Which gives us the benefit of ensuring that everything has been copied from the source to the new virtual environment, but it also, gives that negative of, well, if we need to shut it down while we copy it over, that means that there's downtime, which, as you all know, is also not great in a mission critical or business critical environment. Downtime can cost money. Lost data can cost money. So when we're looking at either hot or cold cloning, both of these things have serious risks associated with them, and both of which can cause a loss of capital for your business. So you have to kind of consider what you're able to do and how you're able to do it as you're considering which approach to take when you're virtualizing these environments. What's the most important thing? Is it availability? Is it integrity? If you need the machines up all the time and having data be 100% accurate isn't the most critical thing, you can hot clone. If the integrity is the most important and you can have a little bit of downtime, take them offline, cold clone them. The way that you do either clone is really the same, whether you're going to hot clone or cold clone. It's very, very similar. Essentially what you're doing is you're determining the resources being used by the existing server to correctly size the necessary resources for the virtual machine, kind of like what we've been doing with our desktop virtualization. We've taken and we've looked at the resources that a certain thing needs in order to decide what we need to create our virtual machine toward. You create the virtual machine with the correct configuration. You copy the data from the source to the virtual environment. And then you run some post-conversion cleanup and configuration. Could be network configuration, removal of applications that you don't need, services that you don't need for virtual operations, maybe installing some new drivers, some new tools onto your virtual environment that didn't transfer over or that you need on a virtual environment. All things to consider when you're hot or cold cloning. And the length of time that it takes to do something like this is always going to depend on the amount of data that has to be converted from the physical to the virtual. The more disks and the larger disks require more time. So if you have fewer disks, smaller disks, less time. So, and then my third bullet point here is that there are many vendor and third-party tools to perform not just P2V, which is physical to virtual, but also V2V, virtual to virtual, and V2P, virtual to physical. So we're going back from a virtual environment into a physical environment as well. So there are third-party tools that work for all of this. So we'll talk for just a second about using VMware Player. So VMware Workstation Player will actually be using VMware Workstation Pro 15 in future modules. So I'm not really going to talk about this much here. VMware Player is bundled with VMware Workstation Pro. It's essentially the same thing. It's a Type 2 hypervisor, Oracle VirtualBox, and VMware Workstation Player, more or less the same deal. Create, manage, and run virtual machines. We'll talk the VMware Player. The VMware Workstation Player is free. We're getting VMware Workstation Pro, and we can get it for free with the education version, and you'll learn how to get that in a future module. And it has some other stuff that can go along with it. VMware Fusion's the Mac version. There's also Parallels and some other stuff. VirtualBox we've already used. And then Microsoft Windows Virtual PCs, a Microsoft Windows-based hypervisor. It's just different types of hypervisors there. Creating new VMs, creating new virtual machines. So you've already had some practice creating a new virtual machine. You created a new virtual machine in Oracle VirtualBox. So when we're thinking about creating new virtual machines, that's usually associated with containment or development. You know, you're launching that new environment, and you're launching new applications on the new environment. When you're creating a new VM build, or when you're creating a new VM, you're building only the virtual hardware, which you've experienced as you worked through that in the previous module when you installed EndeavourOS onto the virtual machine on Oracle VirtualBox. You know, you created the virtualized hardware, and then you went in and you installed the operating system like you normally would, and you could power off and on the virtual machine just like you can power off and on a physical server or a physical desktop. You can do all that kind of fun stuff with your new virtual machines. I go through all this stuff in a video when we get to VMware Workstation Pro, so I'm just going to kind of go through setup here. And we've already done Oracle VirtualBox, and we've already built a new virtual machine, so we're just glossing through that. And we've already done that. And so that brings us to our summary. I told you we wouldn't take as long today because we've already done a lot of the stuff, or will be doing, we've already done or will be doing soon a lot of the stuff that was in this chapter's this chapter's lesson. Call them chapters because I really don't know what else to call them. Units, live streams. You know, I kind of had them planned out based on a certain thing, you know, separate from the labs and stuff that we did in class. Again, you know, I kind of had them separated, but they did end up overlapping a bit. So there's that. But that's what we did today. We talked mostly about the P2V technologies, providing a rapid and automated method for moving existing physical server workloads into the virtual environments. VMware Workstation, you'll become more intimate with in a future module, but it is a Type 2 hypervisor, just like Oracle VirtualBox. And you've all created a virtual machine by now. You've already done it. You've already installed an operating system on it. So you know that creating a new virtual machine is a simple process. So once again, as we close up here, I'm going to say again that I will be writing your midterm this week. Again, it'll be roughly 6 to 8, give or take. Short answer questions based on the stuff that we've talked about in these live streams. If you have any questions about any of that, shoot me an email. Let me know. For those of you who are here with me live today, I'm going to hang out in the chat for a couple minutes so you can ask me questions. Short one today, but like I say, we already covered a lot of the stuff that was covered in the unit today. So I'm going to turn the music back on. If you got any questions in the chat, let me know. Or you can just shoot me an email and let me know there. Thank you all for coming, though, and we'll see you next time. That reminds me, though, in saying we'll see you next time, we won't have a live stream next week since it is the midterm week. No live stream with the midterm. So you'll just have to focus on your midterm project and midterm exam for next week. No live stream. So again, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time, which will be week after next. Thank you.